Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is the second part of the recording for Thursday's lecture. So the first part has already been uploaded, and this is the second part following through. So what I've done is I've had a think through about our conversation today around just in terms of the challenges that you're experiencing. And firstly, I want to say I really appreciate you coming through and sharing this with me, feeling comfortable enough to share this with me. I have had some time to think, and what I am suggesting, if it is approved, to put together a workshop which we will then cover some of the elements that you're having challenges around. So I will keep you posted on that. But before I go ahead with that, I need approval so that remember this, the purpose of this workshop for me to put together and to take you through and train you on it is the elements that where I've identified thus far that there is gaps, and it's based on our engagement today where as you were speaking in terms of the things that you are finding challenging, I have noted them, I've sent them in an email. Once I receive feedback that I've covered all of it, then it will go, I will write an email asking for a workshop to be held covering specific things in the syllabus and additional things that would hold you in good stead as a PR professional. So I hope that really helps you. And the purpose is to make your learning journey as enjoyable as possible. That is why I'm here, and to make it as seamless as possible. So, with that being said, we are going to continue where we left off and talking about social change. And so, when we look at social change in terms of policy development or affirmative action, takes place all the time in the business environment. So, with regards to companies and they need to change their policy, several companies that I've seen is where they have a policy in place and the policy needs to be updated to include changes in the legislation. What would happen is they would create an updated version of this policy to be able to share with employees and have this posted where they can access off the intranet, which is the internal website. Not all change is as intense as the 2015 fees must fall or hashtag Me Too campaign, right? So when we look at the fees must fall, and I'm sure you probably have um, read about it in the media, followed that in terms of the outcome. So when we look at the case study fees must fall, hashtag fees must fall, it says the hashtag fees must fall campaign began in October 15 in South Africa. That was significant in that it highlighted the financial exclusion of many South African students, particularly young Black students, to higher education. The goals of the student movement were threefold: the removal of apartheid and colonial symbols, the opening up of universities so that people from historically disadvantaged backgrounds can access higher education, and a change in the makeup of universities, the Commission of Inquiry into Higher Education and Training, whose role is to find and create opportunities for free education as tertiary educations, um, free education at tertiary educations, was formed shortly after. Transformation in social institution is an example of social change. With regards to the hashtag fees must fall, there was an agenda for social change to take place in terms of access to education, especially for those from disadvantaged backgrounds, and for them to be exclusive in terms of gaining an education to be able to walk that journey like you and I are doing. So, as much as I am a lecturer teaching, I'm also a student. So, it's a right to have access to education from different institutions and to be able to choose. Social change is often unplanned and controversial. So you find something, a breaking news, and that is why I ask you, what is happening in the world today? What is happening locally? The Wits saga with the students' protest was has been taking place for days now, and they did put out a statement saying they're in the process of resolving it. So social change. So that was something that Wits did not expect, and it was something that was unplanned. It's controversial. It's made headlines. It's been covered on the news, on radio, on different platforms. Changes set in motion from fees must fall were controversial in nature. So globally, there has been many well-known examples of social change brought about social events gaining momentum, and that is the hashtag #MeToo movement that was introduced. There's also on page 66 and 67, if you can actually just read through that in your textbook. So it's the bottom of page 66. From a global perspective, it starts off there and it continues to the middle of page 67. You can actually read that in your own time. Organization must implement strategies and alter practices that were not initially anticipated. Environments of rapid change and dynamism, which, no, sorry guys, environments of rapid change and dynamism will not be suited to the top-down approach to strategy formulation. So you see, as much as I am a public relations professional, I do have my flaws and glitches along the way where I may struggle to pronounce a word just because it's one of those days and I just can't pronounce the word. But you move on from it. You do it gracefully, you apologize, and you move on, like I have done so. So organizations and strategists must therefore embrace continuous learning in an environment characterized by the accelerated pace of change. Technology is a major contributor to social change. So in that video that we watched a bit earlier in terms of how COVID-19 is boosting innovation, there were so many concepts that were captured in there. And just as a reminder from the previous video, what I need for you to do is to go through and research in terms of the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth industrial revolution. When did each industrial revolution begin? How did it affect businesses? How did it affect the industry? How did it affect the world? COVID-19 has accelerated the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, where we have things like drones that are able to take medication into communities where access is a challenge. So remember this video that we watched, and you can watch it again. It talks about also finding opportunities. When there is a crisis, there is room for innovation, how to capitalize on an opportunity, and also to be flexible in an ever-changing environment is very, very important. Now, let's move on in terms of when we talk about strategy as emergence versus strategy as prediction and control. So many organizations are adopting an emergent strategy approach versus a deliberate strategy approach. Now, let us unpack in terms of, we've used this word quite a few times, emergent and deliberate. What is the difference? Okay, so firstly, I'm going to start with the deliberate strategy, and then we'll move on to the emergent, because I think the one follows through to the other. So a deliberate strategy is a world of strategic planning, or think tank sessions where discussions take place about what should change in the current business model. It does not work so well in today's volatile and rapidly changing world. Emergent, on the other hand, is emergent strategy is an approach. It is a view that strategy emerges over time as intentions collide with and accommodate a changing reality. It is more grassroots, frontline approach where solving real business problems leads to new strategies. Now, you need to take into consideration, you need to understand what a deliberate strategy is. That's a very simple definition and easy to understand that's in the slide. The emergent strategy as well. So companies, in terms of a deliberate strategy where they have think tank, they have strategy sessions, they have breakaway sessions, and they go and think about things and how the strategy should be in place and how it fits into the business model of the organization. It's aligned to the vision, the values, the mission, all of those things. However, when the volatility and the rapid pace at which the world is changing, you need to have an emergent strategy approach. Because what happens with the emergent strategy approach is that it takes into consideration the changing environment, the changing reality, and the rapidness or the rate at which it changes. So if you look at an example, the company that manufactured drones, did they know that the COVID pandemic was going to hit? No. They were looking at the challenge, which then was fast-tracked due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, people needed to fill, especially in the areas where they have to travel long distances to get to a clinic, hospital, or doctor. They had to limit or restrict movement so they could not get their medication. What happens is with the drone technology, everything got fast tracked and medication was able to be delivered in very remote areas and people did not have to travel great distances. So that is what an emergent strategy is. An emergent strategy is that two entrepreneurs that you saw in that COVID-19 videos, right? So where they have ghost kitchens, they had a long-term vision of expanding the business over 3 years, or in 3 years' time, they imagined that when COVID-19 hit and things changed, that is where they would be in terms of their business, the size of the business, the profitability of the business. They thought it was going to be 3 years ahead. However, when COVID-19 hit, what happened is they used an emergent strategy where they thought, right, this is an opportunity. Many businesses, they don't want to completely close their doors, but they need a space to work from. And they made use of that opportunity, which turned out to be a really good strategy that they used, an emergent strategy. In a world defined by unpredictability, where change is the only known constant, emergent strategy seems to offer a better fit strategic. It's a better strategic fit. So where you have a strategy that is so stringent and there's no room to actually accommodate the volatility and the changing and complex environment, the external and internal environment, then there is the emergent strategy is the option to go where there is room to maneuver in the case where there's volatility, there's change, there's so many different things happen. If you look at Eskom now with the power supply, if you rewind 2 years ago, did we have, or 3 years ago, did we have load shedding in terms of the level that we have it now, where it's every single day, and sometimes it's a moving target where the schedules change. So the app is the best option because it gives you the most updated information, right? So That then in itself, how companies, businesses, even individuals who are working remotely, like what I'm doing now is I am recording this video from home and I do not have power. So I need to use alternative means to actually get this lecture recorded. Or if it was a live lecture where we are connected via MS Teams, and if the lecture is scheduled to start at 10 o'clock, I cannot move the lecture to 12 o'clock. I need to keep it at 10 o'clock and make alternatives. So that is me using an emergent strategy approach. So I've got to be flexible. That means in terms of devices to make sure I have enough data on my mobile phone to connect, to be able to record, to be able to send emails, to do whatever. So those are part of emerging strategies, just not only in the work environment, in our lives as well. So an emergent strategy is a set of actions or behavior consistent over time, which was not explicitly deliberate in the original planning of the strategy. So when you go rewind and you look at the initial strategy, right, it is different in the sense that it is a set of actions or behaviors that's consistent. However, it was not included in the initial or the original planning of the strategy. That a lot of people in their strategies, they do not have COVID-19 pandemic. So as much as all companies do risk assessments, nobody was actually prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic. And you saw the chaos unfolding every single day, and what the pandemic did and how it changed the way we live, work, and had to do business, all of those things. The term emergent strategy implies that an organization is learning what works in practice. So now companies are equipped with, just say if we have another pandemic, hopefully not. The last time that we had a pandemic that was similar to this was the Spanish flu, and it was also respiratory related. So it affected your respiratory system, and there was a need for oxygen, and there we go. The electricity has just come on. So I'm glad this is not cut off, which I'm actually grateful for. So when that happened, is that was the last time that, and there goes the electricity again, guys. That is really funny. So the last time a pandemic like this hit us was the Spanish flu, and then you had others like Ebola, all of those pandemics that broke out. So even though we had the Spanish flu back in whatever date it was, we weren't so medically, in terms of the technology, we didn't see or have the technology that we have in place today. But where we equipped to actually deal with it, not so much. With the ESCOM example and the power, okay? So a lot of people are going into solar. Companies, it's like the drone technology that you saw in the COVID-19 video. Drones were created, they were manufactured, but they were not used or they were not used optimally until COVID-19 hit, and then it accelerated. If you look at solar and businesses that have gone into solar, because you cannot just start up a solar company. There is a lot of red tape in terms of regulations, a legislation that you've got to abide by in terms of being an accredited organization that can install solar panels or solar solutions in a house, in a work environment, and there is a whole host of things that needs to be taken into consideration. So those companies, when load shedding became a reality, a daily reality, that is when they looked at that as an opportunity. And then to take it a step further, the government also said, let's try and incentivize individuals or companies to implement solar so that there is less pressure that is on the grid, placed on the power grid, and that will, in essence, assist with the capacity, the supply of power, the capacity to supply the nation with power, consistent, reliable power. Okay. So what I'm going to switch now is I am going to switch to the home Wi-Fi. So if there's a 2 or 3 second delay, bear with me. That is what happened with regards to the solar and the technology around that, was that we have to actually think. So if you also look at the solutions that is being offered, not everyone can afford solar panels or solar solutions for their home or businesses. Some people are still very much using generators. However, with generators, when there are technical issues with the actual generator, that means there is going to be no power that's going to be able to run that business. The advent of information, environmental, and social sensitization has prompted organizations to adjust their business and strategy models. So, from the environmental point of view, the solar, the government is actually supporting the use of companies, individuals installing solar solutions within their home or work environment, because it has less of an impact on the environment in terms of the power grid. There is less pressure on the power grid. Remember, our natural resources, they are not, how can I call it? So they are scarce. So our natural resources, like your water, your air, all of those resources, okay, are very scarce, and we have to, and that is what the triple bottom line talks about, is people, planet, profit, is that we all have a responsibility. So this does not only sit with government or businesses, it even drills down to us. And I made mention of this example earlier on with the environmental aspect, is that if you're walking on a beach and if you throw a plastic, that means it is contributing to polluting the environment and the water, right? So that is very critical. Unpredictable contingency factors in the business environment necessitates adaptness in strategy formulation. So someone has got to really have their finger on the pulse in terms of establishing, look, there is an issue in this, or this is something that we are seeing that's going to hit. So with South Africa, what we did is we did monitor, the government did monitor the situation closely when the pandemic broke in Wuhan in China, is they monitored very closely, and it was the actions that were put in place were not part of the deliberate strategy. They had to come up with an emergent strategy that was customized to the situation to protect the people of its nation, which was obviously very challenging. Okay, so there's an example of Starbucks on page 68, which I'm going to read. So in early 2018, Starbucks decided to charge customers for the plastic packaging of their takeaway drinks. Although the extra charge directly affected the profitability of their business, this decision by the company was a direct response to the societal narrative concerning the responsibility of organizations to the environment. Revenue received from the charge was given to the environmental charity Hub Bub that is partnering with Starbucks in an initiative to lessen waste. And there's an in-text reference right below that from where it was extracted from. So also, I mentioned the King report earlier, and the companies who are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. If you don't know in terms of how that works, go and have a look in terms of how can a company, or why does a company register themselves on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? What the King report does, it also takes into consideration the environment, reducing carbon footprint, reducing carbon emissions, reducing waste. There are a couple of stores that you've gone into before, and I don't know if you've noticed this or not. Mug and Bean is one of the places that I can think of. If you go to Mug and Bean and you order a cold beverage, they will bring you a straw, and many, I don't know how long, but this has been in place for a while. They used to bring plastic straws to you. Now, when you go to a Mug and Bean, they will give you a straw, but it's almost made like of a paper or a cardboard type of material, which means it can be recycled and it's less waste and it's less harmful to the environment if thrown away. There are many companies who are adopting a similar approach to Starbucks. One of those companies, well, many, I can name a few. If you go to Woolworths and you want to buy something in Woolworths, they ask you, do you want a bag? And if you say yes, it is a cloth bag that you can reuse and you are charged for it. If you go into a Pick and Pay, if you go into a Checkers, if you go into Clicks, they ask you, do you want a plastic bag? Some companies still keep the plastic bag, but what they do is they charge you for it. So you have experienced that, and it's something to take into consideration, because in as much as government does a lot of work around different things, and they look at the agenda of the country, what are the key priorities of the country? Government alone cannot solve the problems of our country. We need to also be change agents to be able to make the world a better place. If you listen to Michael Jackson's song, Heal the World, it talks about you, me, and the entire human race making the world a better place, actually, which means every single one of us. So if we go and use plastic and we throw it on the ground, it is also causing harm and pollution to the environment. We only have one planet and limited natural resources, including water. How many people waste water? In some communities, there is such a need for clean drinking water. And that is where other initiatives come into play, where you look at rainwater harvesting, grey water. So grey water is water that's used in a manufacturing environment that can be reused to maybe wash vehicles in a manufacturing environment. Harvesting rainwater, you've seen tanks which then uh, they collect the rainwater, and that can be used then for watering plants or doing that kind of thing. So it's very important that it speaks to the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. So if you don't understand the triple bottom line, please go up and read up on it. Now, responding to the environment, which takes you through to page 68, and we're going to continue with the emergence strategy. So emergence strategy has often been associated with environments defined by unsystematic and multifaceted elements. Therefore, a crucial element in the emergent concept. And this is a term that was actually conceptualized by the American military, and it's called VUCA. So VUCA, the acronym is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous approach. That is what encompasses an emergent strategy, is those various aspects. So when you have an emergent strategy, that emergent strategy is able to navigate through a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment or uncertain terrain that a company has to navigate through. In a VUCA environment, strategies must allow organizations to respond to new trends or changes. If you look at your digital technologies, the number of companies post COVID-19 that have opened up e-commerce channels, meaning that you can purchase their products and services online, is unbelievable. So that organization, like the example I used earlier, like Takealot and Amazon, they were already e-commerce channels. What Takealot did then is they looked at the things that consumers could purchase over and above what was available on their website. And then consumers could then, when they go on to buy books and DVDs, they can look at other categories of things that are available online and they can purchase that. Go and have a look at a Takealot website or an Amazon, but specifically Takealot, because Takealot also entered into partnerships with other businesses. Now, in the COVID-19 video that we watched, and it mentions in there specifically that a lot of companies underwent mergers and acquisitions. So a company like Takealot, what does it have? It has a wide footprint. It has a wide consumer base. So other companies can leverage on that by partnering with Takealot in terms of remaining and financially sustainable. So in other words, that products for other companies can be available on the website, and that means then they would enter into agreement with another organization like Takealot. In the VUCA environment, strategies must allow organizations to respond to new trends or changes. Managers must be aware of the VUCA factors that affect business environment and to be able to adapt these strategies accordingly. In COVID-19, when you had the pandemic at its the heart of it, where it was the hard lockdowns. So pharmacies, salespeople could not go into pharmacies to speak to pharmacists. They could not go, salespeople could not go to see doctors to promote a product to a pharmacist or a doctor. Companies had to reinvent themselves in terms of they had to create a specific portal that was accessible by healthcare professionals or a pharmacist or a doctor, all of those professionals we are talking about, and be able to engage with their stakeholders. So technology, the technological advancement, such as social media, poses multiple challenges. It's unpredictable and often uncontrollable. So with social media, we've spoken about this before, is that when someone has a bad experience, they've had a bad, they bought a product and they're not happy with, the public are very vocal. They immediately go onto social media and they will even take a picture and they will post it and they will write up about the experience that they have had. And that starts to trend, and it can be dangerous for organizations. It can do serious reputational damage to an organization if not managed properly. That's why, although these social media platforms are in place, we need to, as public relations practitioners, we need someone who assists us with the monitoring of these channels, or if that falls within our area, we then need to manage what is posted on LinkedIn, what is posted on Facebook, what is posted on Twitter, and then you are able to establish what is going on, whether there is any negative perceptions being sent through different like customers' Facebook pages or Twitter, etc. So on page 69, there's an example here that I'm going to read which speaks to what we've been speaking about VUCA and the emergent strategy, the environment, etc. Unilever, so it's called Dirt is Good. It's on page 69. Dirt is Good. Unilever recognized the importance of this rapid social change towards experimental consumption. This resulted in the Dirt is Good detergent campaign, signifying support for children's freedom to explore their curiosity and experience their environment. The Unilever example illustrates how organizations are required to adjust their strategies, product offerings, and stakeholder engagements to accommodate the shifting paradigm and social dynamics. So, with children, we often have parents don't want them to play in the dirt and a whole host of sort of social um, perceptions and attitudes and behavior because they're going to get sick, they're going to pick up a bug or something or the other. Unilever actually decided that they wanted to do this whole social change, and they did it through their products and which is linked to their campaign. So if you have a chance, go and research. When I mean research, go to Google, look up the Unilever Dirt is Good campaign and read up on it in terms of familiarizing yourself in terms of some of the aspects and critique if you want. Critique that campaign. If they probably have a video, go and have a look at it and you'll be able to pick up the different messages, how the campaign was executed, and how it was evaluated. So Unilever actually tried to implement that model. In a VUCA environment, leadership is required to adapt to changing and unpredictable circumstances. Here again, it speaks to the fact that leadership need to support whatever it is that you are doing in terms of implementing a strategy. You need to have leadership or management buy-in. There is no longer a one best way to respond to developments in the environment. With the COVID-19 pandemic, and you're probably tired of this, but because there's so many elements to it, and we've learned so much, we use that as best practices. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the previous company that I was with, there was not only one person on the crisis leadership team. There was a whole host of people. So it was debated. So in some instances, we debated in terms of whether this approach would be right, whether that would be would be right. So what we did is we implemented an emergent strategy, which worked really well in a real life situation that I've seen it. It works phenomenal. In the context of instability in the organizational environment, organizations must embrace a strategy formulation model that is agile and iterative, thereby giving business leaders the opportunity to respond rapidly to developing prospects or threats. In the VUCA environment, paradigm shifts occur more frequently. Technology is not the only area experiencing rapid change. Unprecedented shifts are seen in experiential consumption, the generational workforce, globalization, and many other areas. These are transforming the way that organizations operate and evolve. We spoke about the Unilever example on page 69, Dirt is Good. You can look at that campaign online. So leaders and the organization must seek new orientation and take a fresh approach to management. Leaders must develop empathetic behavior to be more concerned about people and their needs. So in the example today, it's a live example. There was concern. So I expressed concern that I wasn't seeing the proactiveness, in terms of the quality. I was concerned about it and I needed to understand about it. I needed to use that from an empathetic point of view in terms of understanding. So also it works both ways. If I was an unapproachable person, you would not be able to open up and tell me, these are some of the challenges we are experiencing. Now, with the lecturing, we have set lectures in terms of what we cover, in terms of the textbook, in terms of the actual module, and each week what we cover. So I'm looking at an emergence strategy where I've identified that there is a challenge. We actually need to address some of the challenges that you are facing. And my sort of strategy approach was that we conduct a mini lecture, not a mini lecture, a mini workshop. And in the workshop, these concerns and challenges are addressed so that your journey, your PR3 journey, is going to be an enjoyable one and you're not going to hate this journey. So I need to be an empathetic leader in order to understand that there were a lot of changes that happened and that may have affected some of the learnings along the way. Maybe not all, but some of them. However, we have a situation where we need to look at it to say, how can we help improve your experience in your journey? So that is an example, a real life example that I've given you. I was tough on you guys today, and understandably so. When I say today, if you're going to listen to this tomorrow, which is Thursday, it would have been, I was tough on you guys yesterday. Because for me, on public relations 3, is that remember, everything that I'm doing is for your benefit. Because when you go into the real world and you sit into a chair where you have to be a public relations practitioner, that is the kinds of things that's going to be expected from you, from the organization, from your line manager, because they are paying you to do a job. So I want to be able to impart knowledge and to be able to help you overcome these challenges, to be able to get to that place where your journey entering the PR world, when you sit in that chair, you are equipped to be able to do the work that you're doing, and then you love the profession. That is where the end goal is, and that is where we're trying to get to you. So the empathetic behavior is something is that where you are concerned about people and their needs, which is what I'm trying to do, is to be empathetic towards you and also caring about your needs and your concerns. Meaning and purpose take a central role in organizational activities. Okay, so organizations must envisage a possible future state and explore contemporary and relevant solutions to achieving these goals. Decision formulation and the content of the decision itself are critical success factors for shaping the identified cause. Strategy formulation should be used so that results in value-adding approaches and measures for the organization. So the thing to remember is now a lot of companies, especially the ones that did manage to navigate through COVID-19, they have a framework in place that should a pandemic or a crisis of this nature affect the country or the organizations or globally, they have some best practices in place. So one of the things that was done sort of at the tail end of when the last lockdown levels were removed and restrictions were removed is that we held what we called a debriefing session. And we spoke and debated about all the things that went right. And even though we used an emerging strategy, remember, it is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, the VUCA model. There were some things that went exceptionally well. There's some things that didn't go exceptionally well. From that, we have developed best practices. So if something like this should ever happen in the future, the organization is fully prepared. Even government, They have a strategy now in place in terms of if we ever have to go into a state of national disaster, right, which was brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, then we know there are some best practices that government have put in place. One of the key things in terms of employees, right, is very important. And very often what happens is that employees are left behind. I just want to double check here. It says page 17. So some of the things that happen is employees are left behind. In a crisis or in a case where there's volatility, there's lots of change happening. What does the company try and do? The company needs to ensure that it remains financially sustainable. They don't want to retrench employees because that is creating a bigger gap in terms of the unemployment levels and towards the economy. So their focus is very much on the overall strategy, ensuring that it's business as usual to a certain extent, ensuring that all policies and whatever is in place, and they do a whole lot of things. But the one thing that is very key is taking a look at employee well-being. Now, as a public relations practitioner, you are probably going to work with your human, or you're not probably, you will work with your human capital colleagues who actually deal with employee wellness, and they run a number of initiatives. So when it's World Hypertension Day, there will be a number of activities that they may want to implement, or you can suggest to them. So in the case of COVID-19 pandemic, there were people who lost their jobs. That's reality. They lost their jobs. They were losing people. They were losing loved ones. Loved ones were being hospitalized. They didn't know, and they couldn't even go and see them in hospital. There were some people where I heard very sad situations where a husband and wife were both, they had COVID-19. The one ends up in hospital. The one is critically ill. The husband passes away, unfortunately, due to COVID-19 complications. And the spouse is not even able to, because she's in a critical condition, is not even able to attend the funeral. So when it comes to this, in terms of the empatheticness of being a leader, you've got to take into consideration, how is this impacting people? So when we had our very first employee who sadly passed away, is we had to arrange counseling for a whole host of people, not only the person, the team that they worked with. There are people throughout the organization that knew this specific individual. Remember, with funerals, it was restricted to a certain number, or only immediate family members were allowed. So it was very traumatic. And the focus on well-being cannot be underestimated. So generally, companies have what they call it's a wellness program whereby they can actually, it's free of charge. So companies would partner with, like, there's a company called ICAS. There's a few out there. And what would happen is these are free services, counseling services offered to employees, their immediate family members, meaning their partner, their spouse, their children, even a parent, right? So during COVID-19, there was a lot of sort of counseling that was done through these services, and we encourage people within the organization to actually go through and make use of these services. Okay, so lesson 21 was focusing on the emergent strategy in the context of the VUCA environment. an emergent strategy, a radical approach to strategy setting, right? That is on page 70 through to 74. Okay, so there's a video here. I am going to play it, and then I can just talk you through. Just want to open the video and then share my screen. So you will notice, and this is why I say practice makes perfect. Compared to my very first video that I had in recording and navigating through the channels and sharing different screens, to now, I'm not a pro, but I've gotten better at it. So remember, with public relations, the more you're going to read a chapter, the more you're going to understand it. The more you research, the more you're going to be able to find different resources that explain things in a different way. So I'm going to play the video for you now, and it's Strategic Leadership in a VUCA World. So it's Jonathan Woodson. He's a he deals with decision making, voices from the field. I'm going to play that.
A number of years ago, when I was spending time at the U.S. Army War College, where degree in strategic studies and strategic leadership, one of the concepts I was introduced to and became fascinated by was the fact that strategic leaders had to operate in what we call the VUCA world. VUCA is an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now you throw those words together and you say, what? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatile, represents what we do in the military. And the concept at the War College was that strategic leaders and senior leaders had to feel comfortable operating in the VUCA world. War by its very nature is volatile. It's uncertain because every time you develop a battle plan, the enemy is going to change that battle plan after the first encounter. It's complex because you're talking about everything from arms to terrain to culture to political objectives. And it's ambiguous because many times these things are rapidly changing and you get the fog of war, if you will. And it's hard to sort things out. But what was impressed upon me is that strategic leaders have got to bring that clarity to the VUCA world. They've got to see beyond the fog. They've got to define the vision. They've got to define the end state. Now, if you're a good strategic leader, you help define that end state and you clearly communicate it, but you don't tell your talented crew how to get there. You empower them, enable them to use every bit of their ingenuity, every bit of their intellect, every bit of their talent to design the tactical approach to getting to that end state, that vision, that optimal state of being or operating. So I was turned on and challenged and introduced to that term, and I've used it constantly over the years because as you evolve as a leader and become a strategic leader, you have got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Living in that world of challenge, in that world of sort of cloudy, murky, where a lot of factors come together, a lot of variables come together, and sorting things out. Now, I want to lay out, to begin with, before I go back to the military health system, another concept that in trying to work in this VUCA world, which is the old saying is, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? And the issue here is that when you've got a large, complex problem, you don't get frustrated by it. In fact, that's a word that I've eliminated from my personal vocabulary when I talk about problems. And when I mentor my other senior staff and leaders, I asked them to consciously think about eliminating that term. Because what it does is, number one, it conveys to your subordinates a sense that you haven't got control of the situation and you haven't got an answer. But if you get back to the statement of how do you eat the elephant, one bite at a time, your job as a strategic leader is to lay out the series of facts and variables and then approach each one with incremental solutions. So it may be political issues as well as technical issues, but if you lay them out in sort of their smallest elements, there almost surely is an answer to each one of those issues that you've got to deal with. And then it's your job to just sequence them so that you can leverage them to get to the end state and get to the clarity and get to the answer that you need. So you got to understand the VUCA world. You got to be comfortable in the VUCA world. You got to learn how to eat the elephant.
Okay, so that was an interesting video in terms of a thought leader giving you advice in terms of VUCA and the world and things like that. So we're going to go back to the slides. So what we're going to do is we're not going to go through every single slide. There's additional reading for you to do in terms of this sort of the rest of the areas or the lessons, but I'm going to continue in terms of, so emergent strategy in the context of a VUCA environment. So in an environment of economic and social uncertainty, organizational decision makers depend on former experiences to assist them in developing and formulating new strategies, especially if the circumstances are similar. Just like I mentioned before the video, is that if the government had to face a similar situation, a pandemic of the extent like, for example, COVID-19 pandemic, then they have a baseline or the framework to address, and they know what steps to take and what steps that didn't work and what they can do better the next time. So they have sort of a baseline from which to work from. During situations of environmental unpredictability, organizational decision makers rely on past experiences and assimilated awareness to generate current strategies. So if I went into an organization that was established this year and didn't experience COVID-19, it's a new company, brand new company that started in March 2023. And I joined the company in terms of the public relations strategist. And if there is a COVID-19 pandemic, a version 2 that comes up, heaven forbid, we don't want that. I have the intellectual knowledge of how to navigate through that crisis because I have been through it. It's part and parcel of my experience. And for those who have been, and there's always pros, cons, there's always good and bad. So in situations like the COVID-19 pandemic, I say there was nothing good in terms of the people dying, the people getting so sick because of this disease or this virus. However, when we look at like the drones, the exponential growth of technology, drones being able to get medication to people in areas that are hard to access so that they are able to take their medication and also be well, right? You look at the instances where the ghost kitchens were created to help other businesses. You look at mergers and acquisitions that have taken place, right? It was used to assist that situation. And the thing is, out of COVID-19, if you were part of a crisis team in a company that navigated through COVID-19 pandemic, you have undeniably a whole host of experience. So I've been fortunate. So that's why I say it's very, although the COVID-19 pandemic was a very sad scenario that happened, but it happened. So for me, I was very grateful to be in the eye of the storm, to be able to navigate a company through COVID-19 pandemic. And that is something that I take with me wherever I go. So emergent strategies are subjected to the emotional propensity of the decision maker. You can be highly emotional and be invested in people, or you can be absolutely, to the other extent, ice cold and not be invested in the employees, for example. So there are two main schools of thought on strategy formulation: the rational model and the emergent model. A debate exists about the focus on the applicability of the prescriptive, chronological approach to strategy formulation in managing context, known as the rational model, as opposed to the strategy that emerges due to a situational analysis and simultaneous implementation. So with regards to the rational model, it's a prescriptive chronological approach to strategy formulation. Just like you have your PRESA 7-step model, where it is a step-by-step, or even your research process, it is a chronological approach. So you can't do, say, the fourth point in that order, whether it's objective or messages, before you've done your situational analysis. So that strategy, the rational model, is done in a chronological and a very, it's done in a specific step-by-step process, as opposed to the strategy that emerges due to continuous situation analysis, and then at the same time it's implemented. Very important to know the difference between the two, but this explanation is quite simple and easy to understand. The rational model approach has been the dominant approach for a very long time. Rationality refers to a structured, sequential approach to information gathering, logical and analytical interpretation of the information, clearly defined phases in the decision-making process, and the generation of the best possible solution. It's highly analytical and a rational approach to strategy formulation that has an explicit association with the decisions made within the organization relating to a systematic approach in information collection, the critical analysis of the situation based on the intel or the research that has been done, the identification of the necessary tasks that need to be executed, acquisition of resources. So what resources do we need in terms of implementing the strategy? The standardization of procedures in order to accomplish the objectives of the organization. That you can continue reading further also in your textbook. It is in there and we've covered it here. So this is a snapshot of what a rational model encompasses. Due to criticism over the years, we see the rational approach only works in controlled environments where the influencing factors are predictable. This does not work in today's context where businesses exist in an environment that has volatility, instability, constant change, inflation rates going up, going down, petrol price going up, going down, the load shedding schedules, the lack of electricity, the lack of access to this and that. So there are so many things that are happening right now in the environment. And on a global scale, if there is something happening, that ultimately will impact South Africa in some way, not maybe directly, indirectly. With no insights into the future of the rational model, with a high degree of rigidity, can be disadvantaged to a changing context. So if the leadership say we are going with the strategy and we are rigid in it, they're very rigid, they are not having any room to maneuver to implement changes, to be like an emergent strategy, that is a challenge. Remember, when we talk about the social change, this is something in terms of the change in the leadership thinking of why we need an emergent strategy as opposed to a rational model. The speed of the environmental change requires a strategy making process that is more adaptive by designed to maintain a harmonious fit between the organization's strategy and the internal and external influences. Today's businesses in today's ever-changing environments needs an element of strategy, evolution, and flexibility. There is no longer an original plan as strategy is crafted as the organization learns. This is a moving target where the strategy has to evolve depending on the volatility and the changing environment. There's another video that I want to play for you. It's the difference between a planned and emergent strategy that I'm going to play that now.
Hi there. When we're looking at business strategy, a distinction can be made between what's known as a planned versus an emergent strategy. So what does this mean? Well, really, it comes down to how does strategy take place and what is the role of formal business planning in the strategic process? Is it the case that businesses decide where they are and where they want to get to, and by using formal business planning models like SWOT analysis, PESTLE, 5 forces, and all the rest, they determine a clear business plan and strategy to get from A to B? That's the formal way of doing things, if you like, the planned way. Alternatively, sometimes things don't always go to plan, and you do get from A to B, but it's not by the route that you intended. And it's really about a strategy that responds to events as they happen, emerges based around changes in the external environment and the competitive environment. And that's what we mean by this distinction between planned and emergent strategy. It's a concept that is associated with Professor Henry Mintzberg. He defined emergent strategy as a pattern of action that develops over time. And in particular, in the absence of specific missions and goals, or even despite missions and goals, this strategy is the result of accommodating reality, a real life strategy rather than just one that's done in a formal business plan. So here's a distinction summarized in a slide. Planned strategy is the intended strategy, the formal strategic planning process that identifies the aims and objectives, uses all the tools available to the management team to come up with the formal business plan, getting from A to B with a really clearly defined plan. Compare that with the emergent strategy. The emergent strategy is the strategy that actually happens. It's real life. It's the strategy, the decisions that management take as events arise. And often it doesn't involve any, if little use, of formal planning tools. There we go then. That's just a very brief introduction to and a summary of this distinction between planned and emergent strategy.
Okay, so that is what, in a nutshell, what planned and emergent strategy, the differences primarily is in a very simple, short video. So when you looked at that video and the gentleman mentioned things like PESTLE, SWOT, Porter's 5 forces. So these are tools that are used as part of strategy to identify and to scan. So it's almost an analysis of the environment. So your PESTLE is basically your political, economic, right? Your social, technological, your environmental, and your legal factors that are occurring in the environment. So, for example, in South Africa, if the interest rates happen to go up, that is something that is external and cannot be controlled by an organization. What would happen is then that would fall under economic. Your SWOT analysis is something that you look that is internal and external, relating specifically to the company. So your strengths and your weaknesses are what is internal to the organization and what are the opportunities and threats that are in the environment. Michael Porter's 5 forces, it speaks to the competitiveness within the industry that the person is, if there are competitors, if there are people who can supply alternative products, substitutes, etc. So I would suggest go and read up on Hestel, SWOT, and Porter's 5 forces for your own interest in terms of understanding the external environment. Now, strategic communication, I've skipped a few slides and that you're going to read. It's a continuation of the emergent strategy, which we've covered extensively. So there are 1 or 2 videos in there that you can also have a look on your own. And so when we talk about strategic communication and organizational change, environmental modifications have pressurized organizations in South Africa to change and adapt and to take action that is ethically acceptable, sustainable, and that will make a difference to a range of stakeholders. Remember, environmental is looking at the environment and how can we protect the environment and reduce damage to the environment. Reduction in carbon emissions, recycling, less pollution, all of that is to take it into consideration. Taking environmental change into consideration requires communication professionals to function as strategists and a leader. So to be able to be an advisor and to see what is the company doing in terms of their carbon footprint. When we talk about carbon footprint, this speaks to all the elements that affect the environment due to the operations of the business. So whether it's a manufacturing plant that is carbon emissions that's being sent into the environment, that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Change within organizations is premised on effective communication, and the change within the organization is in effect an import of communication. So the organization then constructs strategies that are altered by the environmental collaborations and influences. So you have some companies that actually hire companies who focus on measuring the company's carbon footprint and also advising them, for example, the amount of carbon emissions that is being released into the environment due to a manufacturing facility, and looking at ways in terms of they are like strategists and advisors specifically in that field who would then give advice in terms of how to reduce the company's carbon footprint. Companies actually hire companies like that to actually assist them in terms of getting their reducing their carbon footprint and making a difference to the environment, or helping to preserve the environment that we live in. We only have one planet, right? That's what they say. So formation of strategy is contingent on the process of communication. Communication can cultivate the individual's perspectives and perception as an essential tool for the formulation of strategies. I'm not going to go through all of this because it's linked to the previous slide and what we've covered. And also it's linked to your textbook. So please read through that. Organizational change can either be deductive, where it progresses from a concept to an undertaking and is associated with a deliberate approach to strategic formulation, or inductive, a progression from specific occurrences to the theoretical, which is related to an emergent strategy formulation. Here, the decision maker acquires specific information from the environment or the situational context. So in order to find out what the company's carbon footprint is, they engage with XYZ Environmental Services. It's a company that measures a company's carbon footprint and gives them strategic direction on how to reduce it. And these then can be implemented within the organization, and then thus having, it's having a domino effect. It positions the company as being a responsible, citizen, or corporate citizen, if you want to call it, because they're taking into consideration the environment. Change can be periodic, irregular, sporadic, or incessant and developing. Management possesses the advantage of informing, exposing, and introducing emerging trends, situations, and direction. Once again, your leadership and your management team, you need their buy-in and support in order to progress. Okay, so now there is a mini case study on page 75, which speaks to the organizational preparedness of COVID-19. And you will see the in-text reference. The source is below the article, and you can read that on your own. It's about the COVID-19 when it was first identified in China and how organizations dealt with it. So you can read that up in your own time whilst you're going through the video. Please at the same time have your textbook handy, make notes, and read through the chapter. The process of communication in the context of change. So what we're saying here is that in essence, change of an organization regarding a social arrangement consisting of human value and interaction, generating social realities that are developmental, evolving, and unpredictable. Human nature, so the essence of this talks to the social change and human nature, which means that we are very much, we in our mind have our own set of behaviors, our own set of attitudes, our own set of understanding on different issues. And it's very much tying that in with the organization and its people. So they have a common goal or a common vision in terms of this process. Communication goes beyond the description of a specific aspect within the operations of an organization. Remember, public relations is a discipline that is the pulse or the engine room of the organization. It cuts across every single division, department in an organization, and that is a common thread that public relations is embedded in, because it cuts through all the divisions: finance, human resources, the manufacturing part of the business, the operational side, a whole host of things. It is important to recognize change in its emergent form and see that communication is simply a tool for monitoring and regulating the organization's affairs. Communication determines all activities and procedures that bring about change in every aspect of organizational transactions. Communication can improve understanding of developing change. So if this is communicated, the change is communicated, and you have the support of different people. So for example, in an organization, they have a section where they have 3 different bins, one for glass, one for bottle, one for paper. And they say to employees, whenever you have anything that needs to be thrown away, if it's classified into any of these 3 categories, there are bins situated in areas A, B, C, D, which is obviously easy for employees to access. And they can then, if they're involved in the process, then it makes it a hell of a lot easier to be able to communicate this throughout the business and to get them employees to support the initiative. Change involves all levels of staff and is influenced by and through their discussions and interaction. A system of operative communication must be instituted to include all levels of hierarchy. To my point, it was either in today's lecture or the recorded first part of the recording, is that a company is not only made up of the CEO, management, board members. It's made up of the majority are employees across the business, right? And that is very important to be able to make that association with an employee that they are integral and vital in the business and the role that they play. Change must be understood in a particular situational context. Therefore, the effective approach to confronting and addressing change remains with a communication process that is relevant to that context. And that speaks to internal communication, where you have a culture where people feel they are being communicated to, there's trust within the organization. That plays a huge factor. Also, how employees perceive leadership is very important, whether they will support the leadership in terms of any initiative that they're embarking on. So that is very key to remember. The cycle of continuous change, right? So the cycle of continuous change is part of effective strategic communication. This facilitates all employees to be flexible and inspired to embrace and adapt the changing circumstances in the operational aspects of their duties. So when COVID-19 with the pandemic, the consultation and engagement process with employees was really vital, and it was done on a very broad scale in terms of the information that was sent to employees, and in part of that engagement process was quite intensive because it's for a bigger imperative, meaning that it's helping to save not only their lives, their loved ones, people that they work with, it's to help keep people safe. So communication was very key during the COVID-19 pandemic to keep employees engaged, well informed. Even when the president spoke, a summary of that speech was sent to employees via email. It was put up on the screens, wherever employees were able to access that information, because it was also a very scary time. Employees didn't know what was going to happen. So the 4 phases to the cycle of continuous change is the development of an idea that challenges the current state of organizational operation and practices, the emphasis on action and support mechanisms required to realize the initial idea, concentration on the structures and procedures required to establish the change into the operations of the organization, aims to foster an organizational philosophy that promotes creativity and innovation. It is the responsibility of senior management, your leadership team, to facilitate and establish an environment that embraces constant change. If management or leadership do not have buy-in and the support of employees, that is going to be a problem. And apart from the challenge that they're facing, they face an additional challenge of trying to get the buy-in and support of employees who do not even trust management. So in terms of concluding this aspect or this week of our lecture, to summarize, social change encourages revisiting the social parameters of society. Social change transpires over time and can have consequences for society, including organizations. To respond to an environment characterized by unpredictability, decision makers must adopt a strategy formulation process that is suitable in such a situational context. The rational model, remember we covered the rational model earlier on, comprises a rigid analytical process that is highly sequential in nature. The emergent process or the approach assumes an informal, flexible, adaptable technique providing flexibility where there's volatility in an ever-changing environment, where there's ambiguity, where there's a whole host of uncertainty that looms. The VUCA environments should be used as the emergent strategy approach. Remember what we said, where volatility, uncertainty, there's so many different factors, the 4 factors around VUCA, and that is tied into applying when putting together the emergent strategy approach. There are different videos that you can watch. There's video on coronavirus, Virgin Atlantic to cut thousands of jobs and end Gatwick operations. This was covered on BBC News. COVID-19 pandemic, travel and tourism in for a boost as restrictions get eased. So remember when the COVID pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic, borders closed, airports could not operate, and when the lockdown restrictions were gradually eased, what had happened is the restrictions on travel and tourism became more available, and the economy in terms of travel and tourism, it started to sort of revive, which was a good thing for the economy. So now there is homework to do, which needs to be done. So please listen very carefully. I'm going to take you through to page 80. Read through the case study on page 80 and then answer the questions on pages 81, right? Your homework is to conduct research online on the Virgin Group. So if you look at page 80, right, it speaks to the Virgin Atlantic and the Virgin Group. Now, what you're going to do is you are going to do this homework. I am going to post it on the WhatsApp group, and that will be discussed. So we haven't finished all of the work that was needed to be covered this week. And you know the reasons why we were a little bit behind is because there were some things that needed to be discussed in terms of the understanding of certain things like the PRISA 7-step plan, not understanding that completely, as well as understanding stakeholders, messaging, etc. We're a little bit behind in terms of that, but this is going to be homework that needs to be done. I'm going to post it if you don't get to the video, but you need to actually go to the video, because tomorrow, or if you are listening to this tomorrow, it will be today, would have been our 3-hour session, and this is what we would have covered, right, in terms of the lectures. So you need to understand that you can use that time to listen to the lecture, and then you can work on the case study, and then we take it from there. So guys, that's it for the second part of this lecture, which is Thursday lecture and part B of it. Part A is already uploaded, and I'm going to share the link shortly, and we'll take it from there. So I am hoping that you are going to sign in. You need to actually sign in tomorrow for the 2 o'clock presentation by the CSI manager for Aspen. The meeting Teams link, once again, is on the last page of the roadmap for week 4, and it has a link there. So please use that, dial in, and if there are opportunities to ask questions, please do so. I think it's going to be an awesome opportunity. So guys, have a really great weekend. I will connect tomorrow for the session, and I'm going to be sharing shortly the links on WhatsApp as well in terms of the 2 recordings for tomorrow's lectures.